Hare Krishna, Shamanantru.
Hare Krishna.
Welcome back to the Monks Podcast once again.
You.
So, True, today we thought that we have been discussing recently about Bhishma, various reasons Bhishma Panchak happened, and also other reasons. So, often Bhishma is a complex character from the ethical perspective. So, maybe we could discuss something about the uh, understanding the actions of Bhishma from a ethical and a transcendental perspective today.
Right. Especially, I would, since you have had read the Mahabharata thoroughly, and you also had a series of talks on what did you call it? The characters of the
Mahabharat characters,
Mahabharata?
fascinating Mahabharat characters.
Fascinating Mahabharata characters. So, recently in one lecture, I heard that he stayed for 456 years. That's the kind of lifespan he had. In fact, that also should not be seen as very wonderful because his father told him, "You are a ichha marani. You will have ichha mrityu. Only when you feel that you should leave, then only you can depart." So it's practically immortal. Someone who took very strong vows. In fact, the very name Bhishma, his original name is Devavrata, and Bhishma means one who has taken a severe vow. So let us begin from where that day you were telling that he's specific, you can say pivotal in kind of stopping something from happening in the Mahabharata, or I would put it fast forwarding the injustices or whatever. Can we put it like that? That his vows basically were seen as big stumbling blocks for good to not survive or for evil to flourish, to put it in another way. So maybe you can begin with those three vows story that you explained it to me nicely. Yeah.
Okay, so it could be more said like three aspects of one vow.
Yeah. Sorry, not three vows, but three aspects of a vow.
So when Bhishma was young, he was heroic, he was chivalrous, he was everything that a father would want him heir to be. And naturally, his father appointed him as his heir. But after that, once when his father was wandering through the forest and Shantanu saw Satyavati, so he was attracted to her. And her father, Satyavati's father, said that if she's getting good fortune, let her get full good fortune. That means let her son become the king. So Shantanu couldn't think of disinheriting his son, but he became despondent, and his Devrat noticed that. And when he went to Shantanu's father and said that this is what is the issue. When he explained his terms, he said that I will agree. I won't claim the kingdom. I will give up the kingdom. And her father said that, okay, you may give up the kingdom, but what about your sons? They will claim. He said, I'll have no sons. I will not marry at all. And not only that, he went further in order to assure him that I will not only not ever challenge the heir to the kingdom, the ruler of the kingdom, but I will always protect the ruler of the kingdom. So all this he did in a mood of service to his father. But unfortunately, that even good things done with good intentions can lead to a lot of unfortunate complications. So that's what happened eventually. So basically, from the perspective of ethics, we could say that the biggest blemish on Bhishma, at least aspersion cast on him, is his staying silent when Draupadi was being dishonored. So because he had vowed to protect the ruler of the Kuru dynasty, Kuru throne, so he sided with Dhritarashtra and Duryodhan even when the Kurukshetra war took place. So those were basically the vows which obliged him to fight on the side of the Kauravas and support them. So you were mentioning something about the point of if good people remain silent, then bad will flourish. So are you saying, means how would we apply this to Bhishma, that he remained silent, and that's how the bad flourished? Is that what we want to discuss now?
Yeah. So the first point: does Vyasdev, in writing the Mahabharata, ever tell the reader something from his own side that Bhishmadev should have relinquished his vows for the sake of greater good?
This is an interesting question that from what I have read, the entire Mahabharata is huge, and I have read at least some sections of it quite thoroughly. Not the ancillary stories, but the main storyline. Whether it is you read the Sanskrit a little bit, and then we read the translations. So it does seem that the Mahabharata often adopts, how should I put it, either a morally neutral or a morally ambivalent tone.
Oh.
So in that sense, it is not constantly directly passing judgment. So that means the authorial tone is more, at least from what I have observed, I won't make a universal statement, but it does seem to just describe things from a neutral perspective. So that would be something which, because it's such a big book, I would be open to correction on this point. But I have noticed that it is not like the Bhagavatam, where we'll say Ajamil was so fallen and how wonderful it is that he was delivered by the chanting of the holy names. It is not like that in the Mahabharata. It is more or less like an objective narration. So,
okay, to just take it further, does it expect the reader to come to his own conclusion?
Oh, yes, certainly. In one sense, the whole Mahabharata is a search for dharma. Every book has its defining question, driving question. You see, the Bhagavatam, it is what is the duty of a person about to die. The Ramayana is what are the characteristics of an ideal person. So the Mahabharata question is what is dharma? And it's significant that even the Bhagavad Gita's driving question is the same. Pruchhami tvam dharma sammuda chetaha. So what is dharma? And at the end of the Mahabharata, it's depicted that people are still asking at the end of this whole epic, what is dharma? So within the Mahabharata, it does say that dharmasya mahajano yanagata sapanta dharmasya tattvam guhayam. So it's complicated. It is confidential. But so the complexity of dharma is quite well depicted in the Mahabharata. So I'm sure you must also be having some reflection.
Yeah, so I'd like to begin now with the Bhishmadev as he is presented to me, a reader of Bhagavad Gita, that Duryodhana sees the battle formations, he is a bit worried, and he uses his diplomacy skills. He tells Bhishmadev that I'm fully assured that you are on our side, we will have victory. Then he tells his troops that you all now please protect our grandsire Bhishmadev. So that itself exposes Duryodhana's diplomacy, that on one side he's saying our grandsire is enough to protect us, and then he's saying, hey, all of you should also protect him. And then Bhishmadev, true to his nature that you said one aspect of his all, and I will surely serve the current ruler of Hastinapur, and he loudly blows his conch shell. And I think it was Purnachandra Maharaj in his classic artistic presentation on Bhagavad Gita called Kritamrit says that by blowing his conch shell, Bhishmadev is saying victory or defeat lies in the Lord's hands. That means I might be just doing my duty, but I'm not worried about whether I succeed or not. And let me see as the battle kind of goes. So, what was the reason that made a person like Bhishmadev kind of just lower his head and see Draupadi being insulted? Was it an extreme sense of loyalty or the extreme sense of not being able to do anything?
Yeah, that is a difficult question. I'll share some thoughts and you can also respond and you can also add your thoughts. So let me just describe the incident where this has happened. So in the gambling match, the Pandavas are playing, primarily Yudhishthira is playing, other Pandavas are sitting, and Yudhishthira keeps gambling and he is facing a rigged match where Shakuni is like a professional gamester. And Yudhishthira keeps losing till he loses everything. Then he stakes his youngest brother, and like that he stakes all his brothers, and he stakes himself. And then finally he stakes Draupadi. And then he loses her also. And at that time, Karna viciously suggests that now that she's our property, let's bring her here and let's disrobe her. So Dushasana is sent there and Dushasana drags her in. She's in a single cloth. And at that time, she desperately cries out to the assembly for help. And when she's heard the circumstances, she looks at the elders, he says that if Yudhishthira had already gambled himself, then he was no longer his own master. How could he have gambled me? So at that time, what happens is Bhishma, actually nobody answers. She keeps asking the question, and then various people, including Vikarna, he rises and he takes a stand against Duryodhana, but Karna silences him. And he said, at least the assembly should answer your question. So Bhishma, because Dhritarashtra is silent, Bhishma is the onus falls on Bhishma. So he says, "O Draupadi, it is laudable that even amid such a great adversity that has befallen you, you are still talking about dharma and reminding everyone of dharma." So he said that the wife is always under the care of her husband. So in that sense, the wife belongs to the husband always. At the same time, a slave, one who has lost himself, does not have any possessions. So considering these two ethical principles, I am confused. Therefore, I cannot answer your question. And that's where it remains. And then they try to disrobe, and it doesn't work because Krishna provides an unlimited cloth. So the overall issue here is that Bhishma, so when this Bhishma remains silent, well, he's not literally silent, you could say. That he does speak, but he speaks and he expresses inability to resolve the ethical conundrum over there. So in some ways, we could say that Bhishma gets caught in the letter of the law without considering the spirit of the law. That is what we call a niyamagraha. Now, what would be the spirit of the law? Okay, whatever be the rules for a woman to be dishonored and disrobed in public in a royal assembly, that is outrageous and that has to be stopped. Now, whether one can find appropriate ethical a moral principle or not for restraining that act, is that a question? Is there some kind of conscience or moral sense that we have which does not depend on finding the exact letter of the law to support that? Well, that could be a question that could be raised. And we could say that in one sense, Bhishma sticks to the letter of the law, so that's like niyamagraha. So having said that is, this pastimes can be understood at multiple levels. So there is the ethical level at which you can understand the pastime. And then there is another level, the transcendental level. So at the transcendental level, ultimately, we could raise so many questions. Why did Yudhishthira even have to gamble? And we can get circumstantial reasons for that. But even he had to gamble, why did he gamble so much? So we could say that this was a pastime orchestrated by something like the will of destiny or by the arrangement of the Lord, by which ultimately there was an invaluable devotional principle being demonstrated. And that was that even when we have many, many protectors, which women could claim to have 5 protectors of the caliber of the Pandavas. And even then she was left defenseless, protectionless. At that time, it was only the Lord who protected her. So that the Lord is our only ultimate protector, this pastime is meant to demonstrate that. And from that perspective, all the characters act accordingly. There may be circumstantial reasons why they act accordingly, but those are external. Ultimately, they're acting so that the Lord gets to demonstrate this principle. This could be something similar to how in the 7th canto of the Bhagavatam, it is described that when Hiranyakashipu is terrorizing the universe, everyone bows down to him. Even it is said Narad Muni bows down to him. But Prahlad does not bow down to him. So now, is Narad Muni corrupt because of his bowing down? No, in one sense, for that pastime, the whole pastime is orchestrated in a way to illustrate the glory of Prahlad Maharaj. So he's still a boy, he's Prahlad at that time, but still to illustrate his glory. So some pastimes have to be, their transcendental dimension cannot be downplayed, leave alone neglected. That this pastime is transcendental. And this is the lesson that is illustrated, that Krishna is our ultimate protector. And generally the Bhakti tradition has focused on that, the image of Draupadi raising her hands in helplessness and the unlimited cloth coming out without even her noticing her eyes are closed. That is one of the strongest devotional images in the broad Bhakti tradition. So that transcendental lesson is what is to be demonstrated and learned. So we could say that that is a transcendental perspective. You would like to add something about this perspective before we come back to the ethical?
Yeah. So I agree. This is, I think, one of the most important points which you have mentioned, that unless one has a author, beginning, and iti, the end, when you are trying to understand either the Ramayana or the Mahabharata or the Bhagavad, that what exactly is the end point of understanding any particular story. So whether Krishna will protect you if you are his devotee from impious forces. So that's very easy to understand. You have Shakuni, Dushasan, Duryodhan, Karna to some extent. Like shades of evil here and there, but in one sense all made of the same color. With Bhishma and Drona to some extent, I feel that Krishna says, I'll also save you from so-called pious personalities or pious forces if for some reason they happen to be against you. So there is a good reason why the Kauravas were determined to not give any kingdom to the Pandavas because of greed and whatever. But Bhishmadev didn't have that kind of a reason that one should not give them even land that can be accommodated on the head of a pin or whatever. So his fighting the war was not because he thought maybe the Pandavas made some mistakes or they are also adharmic or whatever. His was a very personal reason, and he could not even kind of explain, or maybe it was just already like something is so heavily advertised. Oh, grandsire, you will always protect the throne, right? And you will always protect the one occupying the throne. So even if you have the desire to say, no, not in this case, because this fellow is adharmic. Like somebody reminds you of a vow which you have taken and kind of just makes the knot a bit tighter, just tightly binds you to your own vow. So from Bhishma's point of view, it is a personal thing. But from the cosmic point of view, Krishna is kind of giving this assurance that, my dear devotee, if there are impious forces rallied against you, that's to be considered natural. Even if apichet, like even if it so happens that somebody, because of his own pious reasons and a pious person, but somehow happens to be in front of you and is a very formidable adversary, still I will protect you.
So wait a minute. So are you talking this from?
I'm talking from the cosmic, the big
perspective.
The big angle. I'm talking from the perspective which a reader should take. That through this pastime, Krishna is assuring you and me 5,000 years later, when this thing has taken place, that even in your life, if there are, I'll repeat once again. If there are impious things rallied against you, then you know that Krishna will help me because, I am a devotee and God is supposed to. I have chosen God's side. So Arjuna chooses God's side. Now it so happens that somebody against Arjuna is also a pious person. But Krishna said, because you have taken this choice, my devotee will never perish. So I will even do something to vanquish those who are supposedly pious from the worldly point of view. But because they could do some harm to you, I will protect you from that harm.
Okay. It's a beautiful point. So we focus now. There is always.
I have one more point connected to this. Maybe I'll tell you that later.
Yeah.
Should I continue that now?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So another thing is connected with this is.
Okay, so just let me reflect on what you said, if I get it right, before I move forward to that point. So what we are talking about is here that while an ethical perspective can be considered, and we will consider it in due course, but it is important to note that there are deeper motives going on, deeper purposes being pursued. And that's why, like we can say, there's more than meets the eye.
Yeah.
So in this context, that Krishna, he says, when he will protect, I'll always protect my devotees, apiche suduracharo. So are we acknowledging that what Bhishma did is sudurachar? Or even we are making a hypothetical case that even if it's considered durachar, is it Bhishma will be protected, or Arjuna, who has to fight against Bhishma, which might be considered durachar, Arjuna will be protected from that? In what context did you quote that?
Yeah, my point is that Arjuna need not worry whether somebody is acting from durachar or whatever. Arjuna has taken the choice that Krishna, I want to be on your side. So whether the opposing forces are dharmic or adharmic, Krishna says, you don't worry about that. I'll protect you.
Okay.
That was a thing. So it was like Bhishmadev's surrender is seen here, that he allowed himself to be used as an actor in this grand stage. That although I don't like it, I have to play the role of an adversary to those whom I love, just because of my vow.
Yeah. So now the challenge here comes up, like when you talk about these deeper motives, is that there is no indication of this in the Mahabharata itself. And in the Mahabharata, Bhishma even says that I am bound by money, I am bound by wealth. The wealth of the Pandavas, of the Kauravas has bound me and I have to fight against them. Now we could take that statement literally, although I have severe objections to taking that statement literally. I'll tell you why also. But the point I'm making is that there's a Mahabharata narrative which doesn't indicate much that Bhishma is internally a devotee, externally obliged to fight. Although, of course, there are times when Bhishma glorifies Krishna and he clearly acknowledges Krishna's divinity, especially while trying to deter Duryodhana from fighting. So, in one sense, the devotional dimensions of Bhishma's decision are not explicitly told in the Mahabharata. But the ambiguity, that the knowledge that he is a devotee is that he glorifies Krishna and he tries to get the reason to submit to Krishna is always there. So, in one sense, because the Mahabharata doesn't mention it, so either different people can arrive at different inferences, or we can look at the broader Bhakti tradition, the Bhagavatam's depiction of Bhishma. We can look at what the Acharyas like Srila Prabhupada have said. And then we can try to infer what Bhishma was thinking. So what you are telling is an inference that we have drawn from the Acharyas. So now I would like to raise a question here. If somebody doesn't want to accept the inference of the Acharyas, this is the literal narrative of the Mahabharata, then that person is left to piece together the threads. Okay, Bhishma, he certainly chose the bad side and he speaks some words that I am bound by wealth. But at the same time, he is devoted. He is actively trying to stop Duryodhana from fighting whenever he has an opportunity. to recognizing that he cannot, telling him that he cannot win against Krishna. So in that sense, the ambiguity, the ambivalence, the contradictions in Mahabharata cannot be resolved just by reading the Mahabharata. We need some aid in understanding. So one way of interpreting it is just put the Bhagavatam aside and say that, oh, Bhishma was weak. So because he was weak and he stayed silent. But I would say that kind of reading, it doesn't consider the Mahabharata also fully. So the Mahabharata may not give us answers to why Bhishma acted the way he did. But certainly the Mahabharata does not lend itself to the answer that Bhishma was simply weak or attached, or what would you say, that his silence led to the bad people doing bad things. Because he did not stay silent. He was caught in an ethical dilemma, but he was not silent in that sense. Even during the Kurukshetra war, and even during the peace negotiations which happened with Krishna, he did not remain silent. Am I making sense in what I'm saying here?
Yeah. The subject matter itself is like a creature with many horns and many tails, and so it is difficult to capture it. I would just put it graphically like that.
Yeah. So maybe what I was trying to do is, maybe we could decide on epistemology before we go into ethics. So epistemology basically is what are our sources of knowledge? And how do on what foundation are we having this discussion? So if somebody says that I don't accept the devotional version that Krishna is, that it is all Krishna's plan, well, okay, then what? Then we are left on epistemological uncertainty, because the Mahabharata stone is broadly ambivalent. So, and the Mahabharata doesn't deny that he's a devotee and he's respected. So if he had simply been weak-minded and he had remained silent, and that was if we are making that judgment, then the people who were with him, Yudhishthir, never, or none of the Pandavas hold Bhishma responsible for what happened to them. So there is no anger toward Bhishma as far as I have read expressed in the Mahabharata. This anger, Bhima is really angry with Duryodhan. He takes a vow to destroy Duryodhan, but he doesn't take a vow like that with Bhishma. So in that sense, epistemologically speaking, we need to consider that there is much more going on, and what are the commentarial tradition that from which we can learn.
I agree. So basically, Mahabharata, look, I'll give you something which our audience, some of them might understand why I am saying this. You heard of Alice in Wonderland?
Yes.
Right. Now, why was it considered something like a watershed moment, or at least a significant thing? Because morality tales and good always triumphs, and be always honest, and good boys always tell the truth, good girls always behave properly, blah, 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 so many things. This was the first popular children's book which didn't have anything to do with a defined morality. Like, this is how you should do it. It was just, things were just happening. Things are just there. There is a Mad Hatter and there is a mouse who is always late, and we won't go into detail with that. So a whole generation or many generations of people being kind of influenced, I would say, also would read the Mahabharata and say that there is no good and bad. It is just convenience. It is just expediency. Duryodhana is not necessarily bad. He was just ambitious. And it is not wrong to take care of your adversaries. Like in the modern sports, politics, business, particularly, you do like that. And in fact, if you adhere to your vows in such a way that the vows affect you in a negative way, adverse way, you are a fool. You should give them up. Because everything is expedient. There is no, I'm taking your angle of what is the epistemology behind this. So, Bharata Artha Vinirnaya, how the Bhagavatam is described, it rounds up, it adds a gloss, and sometimes it adds a mighty punch to what the Mahabharata has been trying to say. So, from my small example, that just Bhishmadev sings the Vishnu Sahasranam. Why should he do that? Was it just a film song? Was it just something poetry which he likes? Or because he's a devout Vaishnava, that through his lotus lips, the world is given this. It's not like he created the Vishnu Sahasranam. Like many famous poets, many famous poems. Like for example, Satyavrat Muni's Damodarashtakam, it is attributed as he sang it. Am I right? Somewhere I've heard that he didn't create it. Or like one series of prayers by Daksha in the sixth canto, they're not his creations. He heard it. They were glorification of Krishna and he just kind of related it. So Bhishmadev singing the Vishnu Sahasranam shows that he's a Vaishnava. He's a devout personality. That personality, for some reason, the Mahabharata doesn't give that much of exposure, but that much is given. So when the first canto of Bhagavatam begins, there is no question of ambiguity about who Bhishmadeva is. The moment his dialogue begins, Bhishma Stuti, he said, here he is, the self-same supreme personality of Godhead Narayan. So there is Siddhanta. And the next moment he starts crying. Oh, Vipra Achyuta Dharmashraya. These Pandavas were protected by the Brahmanas, by Lord Achyuta, by Dharma. But my heart bleeds to see what happened to them. So there is strong ethos, there is strong pathos, there is strong logos also, there is logic also. But then, so at least I would like to cling very firmly to this epistemological thing that Bhishmadev's personality really can be deduced by reading Bhagavatam first, then going into Mahabharata to find out what exactly were the nuances, what exactly were the detail. And my last point here is, and this is where I feel that even some of our devotee readers reading modern Indologists, or like there is a whole crop of people writing books on Dharma, Mahabharata, and surprisingly, they are united in castigating Bhishmadev severely. Have you noticed that? Or would you like to talk on that?
In one sense, it is like a fertile ground for people to voice their own opinions. And my understanding would be that we are as you said, we are following a particular tradition, and we have our acharyas, and they have helped us understand the not just particular scriptures, but also life and its overall purpose. So if we have got understanding of the big picture, and then they have explained scriptures in scriptures with very deep and coherent insights in one sense, then why not we refer to them? And at one level, I wouldn't consider it wrong if somebody takes Bhishma, from Bhishma's action, somebody takes this lesson that, okay, that when something wrong is going on, I should not stay silent.
Okay.
So there's a difference between, say, judging a character and drawing a lesson from a story. So if we see in the repeatedly, Srila Prabhupada also does these things. In the Bhagavad Gita, in the first chapter, he's praising Arjuna. Although he's in the middle of a war, about to fight a war, but he's not rushing into it impulsively. He's thinking and that he's pondering his choices, his decisions. That is laudable. And then in the second chapter, immediately Prabhupada says that, Arjuna is in tears. Tears indicate a lack of knowledge, spiritual knowledge, ignorance, bodily attachment, lamentation because of that. And so it's a very significant and drastic shift in the mood. So broadly speaking, Madhusudan Saraswati explains that in the first chapter, Arjuna's qualifications for receiving the knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita are described. And from the second chapter onward, how Arjuna is in a plight because he doesn't yet have that knowledge is described. So there are two different perspectives. Now, in one sense, in neither of these perspectives is the aspect that this whole pastime is orchestrated by the Lord's arrangement. Arjuna is actually exalted devotee, and Arjuna is put into illusion by the Lord's arrangement. So that is not talked about. Now, of course, that is mentioned elsewhere, but in this perspective, it is not mentioned. So while keeping the transcendental perspective in mind, we could draw different lessons. So first lesson could be that, yeah, we shouldn't rush impulsively. We shouldn't think that my situation is so urgent that I don't need to consider like spiritual dimension. I don't need to consider philosophical perspective. And then, yes, we also need the humility to, I don't have spiritual knowledge, and that if I am getting overwhelmed by emotions, maybe it is because I'm not as spiritually knowledgeable as I thought I was. So in my understanding, both these lessons have their validity, but it is only when we reduce the character to the particular lesson we are drawing from that character. That is when we make a serious oversight. So,
very good.
Yeah. So, sorry. So just I'll complete this point. Thank you. So that drawing a lesson that we should not stay silent, that is fine. But from there to say that Bhishma was wrong because he was attached or because he was blind or whatever, that would be a little, it would going overstepping. And even if somebody wants to say that, okay, that is one perspective. If we reduce the character to that, that is where the problem comes in my understanding. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says 1822 that to make one thing into everything, yattu kritsnavadekasmin kari saktam hetukam ratvarthavadalpam cha tamasam udaharutam. So that to make one thing into everything, that means to take one incident only and to use that as the absolute criteria, that is a serious problem. So that would be my concern in those castigating Bhishma and saying that it was his silence that caused the war. Well, I doubt it very much. That is a very questionable assessment, or not only questionable, it's a very reductionistic assessment of the situation.
Agreed. So one final thought, like I have reached the end of my points.
If you don't mind,
yeah.
I would like to introduce it will not take much time, but we'll introduce some perspectives here. Like, how do we decide the ethics of an action? So in this ethical theory has been also developed quite a bit in modern society. And broadly, we can say there are three theories about ethics. One is categorical. This is right, this is wrong. It is deontology, it is called. That the idea that ethics is decided in terms of categories of actions. Then the other is consequentialist or utilitarian. An action is right or wrong based on whether it ends up doing good or bad. And the third is what is called as value ethics. Value ethics means that it is a person should have values, and we look at the overall ethical character of a person before we decide whether an action is right or wrong. Now, in our tradition, all three can be used. So the first is this is right, this is wrong. That's categorical ethics. But that's all that is. This action is wrong. So now this is a very reductionistic way of looking at things, and real life is never that simple. So if the classic example is that if a thief, if say a rioter comes into people are rioting, and one of their targets is our friend, and that friend asks us for a shelter, and we hide that person in our basement, and then the rioters come and knock at our door. Is he there? Now, do we do the truth, speak the truth and sentence our friend to death practically, or do we speak a lie and save the life of our friend? So the problem with categorical ethics is that there is no basis for deciding, there's no scope for considering that there might be a hierarchy of ethics, hierarchy of values. So isn't preserving a life more valuable than speaking truth? Yeah, it is. So this category, my understanding is that those who are condemning Bhishma for remaining silent in the Kurukshetra war, or not in the Kurukshetra, in the Draupadi's assembly, or siding on the side of the Kauravas in the Kurukshetra war, they operate under this categorical ethics. Now, a woman is being dishonored. How could he stay silent at that time? Well, okay. So the other two categories are consequentialist. So when we discussed the explanation that through that incident, what happened was Krishna demonstrated how he protected Draupadi. So from the consequential perspective, what happened was an important devotional principle was demonstrated. From the consequentialist perspective, in the Mahabharata war, by Bhishma's fighting on the side of the Kauravas, and still Bhishma being defeated, and the Kauravas being defeated, the consequences demonstrated that no matter how powerful somebody may be, if they are alive, if they are on the side of wrong, then they're on the side of evil or greed or adharma, they will be destroyed. So that lesson was demonstrated quite. So for this could look from the consequential perspective, and then we could look at it from the value ethics perspective. Value ethics would be, now all these three, we could give examples in our tradition. Elsewhere also it's being used, these ethics. But value ethics is the idea that if some person who is normally very exemplary, respectable, even worshipable, that person occasionally does something questionable, it is we who have to hesitate. Like we say, Teji asam na doshaya. Lord Shiva can drink bhang. So, or Vaishnavera kriya mudra vigyana bujaya. Now that is not an absolute principle that don't judge a Vaishnava's actions, because a Vaishnava is also defined by some actions. And certain actions are not accepted. But while a person of a saintly person or a respectable person is overall living a respectable life, if occasionally they do something questionable, then don't misjudge them by that action alone. So from the virtue ethics perspective, Bhishma's virtues are seen again and again and again in the Mahabharata. If he was simply so blinded by attachment to his vows or whatever, why would a person who is so blinded by attachment tell how he would die? He himself gave that plan out to the Pandavas. On top of that, he, as we discussed, that you mentioned Vishnu Sahasranam, that was spoken when Krishna came by his side. So his very virtue is seen in the fact that Krishna came by his side during the last moments. And not only Krishna came by his side, but you could say that is not exactly his virtue, it is only his devotion. Okay, devotion is the topmost virtue. But even if you want to differentiate from that perspective, but Krishna asked Bhishma to give instruction on virtue, on dharma, to Yudhishthir. Yudhishthir is Dharmaraj. And Yudhishthir was on such lamentation, and Bhishma instructed him. And Yudhishthir was pacified by the instructions of Bhishma. So that means Bhishma was considered not just an ethical, not even if he was just a great devotee, and that's why Krishna came. No, Krishna considered him also an ethical authority, authority on dharma. And that's why he spoke Raja Dharma elaborately. And Yudhishthira asked serious questions. So the testimony of the Mahabharata, while I earlier said that the Mahabharata doesn't make ethical judgments while describing the incidents, but the Mahabharata does describe incidents that would question our snap ethical judgments. So that's about anything you would like to add from these three ethical frameworks?
Yeah, I just like that point that today's caustic observers, superficial observers, should not be taking that judgmental angle. Why? By like I'm making a daring statement, sort of. I'm just keeping it for your observation. Seeing how Duryodhana came to his ruin may or actually may not motivate people not to do evil. Seeing how Duryodhana met his downfall may not motivate someone not to do things what he did. But to remove the foundation of admiration and adulation for Bhishmadev by saying that, oh, he just was a mute spectator, he didn't do anything, you would have done so much. That would cause ruination for your spiritual life. I'll put it once again. By seeing how evil flourishes, may or may not, and flourishes and then goes to ruin, may not stop you from becoming evil. As there are people who are saying there is a Mahabharata from Duryodhana's point of view. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So we are seeing very few people actually trying to understand Bhishmadev from Bhishmadev's angle and Bhishmadev from the epistemological thing. Like there is a definite purpose behind why Krishna allowed some things to happen. So Bhishmadev taking the vow, with these 5 arrows, I'll finish off the Pandavas, rest assured. And then Krishna foils his plans. He said, oh, Madhava, you did this to me today. You are making me break my vow. You are making me go against my vows or breaking my word. I am going to make you break your vow today. So there, unless you have the acharyas and unless somebody tells you there is rasa involved here, there is virya ras in action over here. Here is a devotee who is relishing chivalry. The devotee has become the Vishay. The devotee has become the Ashray. Krishna becomes the Vishay of that rasa. How else will you have chivalry rasa unless you are opposing foes on the battlefield? So the culmination point of this rasa necessitates that the devotee and the Lord have to be on opposite sides. Just like for parental love, Nanda Maharaj and Yashoda Mai have to understand that he's not a demigod, he's not a supreme person. He's just my son. There is lightning and he rushes to his mother saying, I'm afraid. So you don't tell me that he's bhirapi vibheti, yad vibheti swayam bhayam. Don't describe Krishna to me like that. So this is the rasa speaking. So this is my final point, that we have to understand Bhishmadev's special rasa. Again, very nicely you pointed out, it doesn't mean that in your life you remain a spectator when you could do something. You are not Bhishmadev. Your vows are not that sacrosanct. Like you talked about whether you should save somebody or break your vow. You should save somebody if that is the necessity. So that's my final point.
Beautifully put. So the rasic aspect is also very important in this case to understand. And so overall, if I may use a metaphor to here describe this, that it is like the pastimes are almost like multi-level.
Oh, yes.
And if we are only at the ground level and we are only looking at the ground level, we are missing a lot of the picture. And then we are missing a lot of the picture. What are we doing is, we are bringing things from our own head to fill the missing links, to fill the missing pieces over there. But to fill the missing pieces, actually, we cannot just look. In one sense, the Mahabharata is, because it's a search for dharma, and it doesn't really give crystal clear answers to search for dharma. It illustrates how complex dharma is. So the missing pieces that are there, okay, why did Bhishma exactly act the way he did? There are some answers which people come up, but often people bring in a lot and then they superimpose their conceptions. So drawing lessons from the pastime is fine, but as we rise to the higher levels, there is so much more to appreciate in the pastime, so many subtler dimensions. So it's a beautiful point. Should I try to summarize?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so we discussed broadly today about the ethics of the actions of Bhishma. And in that connection, we started that, was can Bhishma be subject to the charge that that he was a good person who remained silent, and that's why bad people did bad things. Like Duryodhana got away with all his actions. So we discussed how Bhishma was bound by a vow, and he considered his vow sacrosanct. And although he stuck to his vow, that does not mean that he let that vow control him completely. He's still devoted, and you cannot accuse him of silence, because he was not silent. He was bound, but still he was vociferous in his speech on many occasions. During the Draupadi Vastraharan, that pastime could be seen at multiple levels. One is that we could say that at that point, Bhishma got caught in a ethical dilemma, and he chose the letter of the law over the spirit of the law. But that is very different from staying silent in the presence of injustice. It's more of an ethical crisis rather than simply a passivity born of fear or blind allegiance or something like that. And then another perspective is that, from a transcendental perspective, Bhishma's actions were meant so that the devotional principle of Krishna being the only protector could be demonstrated. And then if we move towards so from the epistemological perspective, if we look only at the Mahabharata stone is morally neutral or morally ambivalent, and it gives us, it doesn't lend itself to an easy interpretation. And those who want to interpret, they have to select some parts and neglect some parts. So those who want to say that Bhishma was weak to stay silent, and so they often neglect the part that Bhishma was considered a great devotee, where he spoke the Vishnu Sahasranam, and he, in that sense, his devotional side, his side where he was constantly trying to deter Duryodhan from fighting. The fact that Bhishma was considered so virtuous by Krishna that Krishna asked him to pacify Yudhishthira and to instruct him in Raj Dharma. So those are facts which you cannot overlook. So from the perspective of the Mahabharata war, Bhishma fought on the side of the Kauravas. Externally, he might say that I fought because of wealth. So that is out of his humility. He's speaking at an external level of reality. At a higher level, he wants the world to know the glory of Krishna and those devoted to Krishna, that they will win by Krishna's grace, even when a person of his caliber is opposing them. So he took that thankless task. And then from a Rasik perspective, that the Bhishma fought on the opposite side of Krishna so that Krishna could enjoy Virya Ras. So these are higher levels which we need to keep in mind. And even if you want to consider from the contemporary ethical perspective also, ethical frameworks. So categorical ethics is very limited. Deontology doesn't take in the complexity of real life. So we discussed that how from a value ethics perspective, Bhishma's character stands laudable, and from a consequentialist ethics perspective, also Bhishma's actions led to some very important devotional principles being demonstrated. So that way, we can say that we can learn certain lessons from Bhishma's character, but don't impugn his character by reducing him based on certain actions alone.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.